So this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a simple table in DBBrowser for SQLite, and then also how to make really two related relational tables so that one has keys in another one. Before I actually talk about making tables, let's talk about why we're going to be having more than one table. And this is like a really brief overview of this, but I think it's important to understand what's going on. So let's say I want to have a database or a table that is really going to contain a bunch of movies and their genres. And I just put a few down just as an example with 4 different genres. And this could work. I could search it and things, but it's really not in good form. And what I'm going to be talking about is really something called normalization. I'm really not going to get into all the specifics of that, but if you'd like to learn more about that, look up database normalization, and it will go through the different normal forms and the rules of each. But part of this is looking at a database and making sure there are no redundant values. So for instance, in genre, look at that comedy comes up several times. Sci-fi is listed several times, as is action and animated. Now the problem with this is that if somebody were to be entering entries in a database, they could make a mistake and type it wrong. So if you're searching for it, sci-fi might have a different spacing and then it wouldn't come up in the search, for instance. Or what if later on I don't want it to say animated, but I want it to say animation? I'd have to go through all of the records and change them to fit, and it would just be kind of a mess if you're updating and things. So it's really a good idea not, and also it takes up more space because look, comedy is written a bunch of times and so on. So instead, we can make a separate genre table, separate from the name of the movie and such, and then use that as a key to what each genre is. So what we can do is break those into 2 tables in our database. So let's say we have a movies table, and I set up an ID. That would actually be considered, I'm going to use that as the primary key. A primary key is something that will uniquely identify a record in a database table. A few rules with this is that it needs to not be null. It can, once it's assigned a value, it can never change. And so I have a primary key or an ID field for movies. I also have one for genres. And I have my movies here, and I have my genres here. So it's separated, but there are still duplicates. So what I want to do is really fix this so my my genres table only has each unique genre listed once. Okay, so then what we need to do is add an additional column to the movies table and then add a foreign key to link these together. And so what we're going to do is for each of these, we have, let's say Back to the Future. Let's say that is comedy. So what I'm going to do is look at the ID. I'm going to use the primary key of the genres table is going to be the foreign key, if you see that as FK, in my movies table. So Back to the Future, I look for what it is, comedy. So what that's going to store is 1. So let's say Guardians of the Galaxy, that could be, let's say, action. Finding Nemo, that would be animated. Ready Player One, sci-fi. And it doesn't usually have to go 1, 2, 3, 4. I think those were my first 4 examples. So Toy Story would be animated. So notice I'm using the ID for each appropriate value from the genres table in my movies. Big Lebowski would be comedy, Groundhog Day comedy, action, and so on. So we would fill that in, and then the database is going to look like this. We're going to store our table it's going to look like this for movies. It's going to look like this for genres. And then we're going to use SQL to connect them when we're retrieving data. So I wanted to kind of show you what our tables are going to look like before we actually create them. Since we're going to be using genres as a foreign key in our movies table, I'm going to go ahead and create that table first because that's just a basic straightforward table. All right, so now I'm in the DB browser for SQLite, and here I'm going to be creating my database, which will hold my tables. So one database can hold multiple tables. So I'm going to go ahead and click on New Database, and it's going to ask me to name it. For now, I'm just saving it in my folder where my SQLite database portable is, and then later on I'll be moving my database file to my Unity project. So this is pretty easy to work with. So I'm making a movies, really a movies table and a genre table. Now I want to make sure that my database is not also called movies, or it will confuse things. So what I'm going to call this is movies. I'll call it movies DB, as in movies database. So it just tells me when I'm working in SQL that I know I'm talking about the database versus the table. So I'm going to call this movies DB and hit save. Now it's assuming that I'm going to be adding a table because databases hold tables. I think that's a great assumption. So it automatically came up with edit table definition. It figures you're going to want to make one. So I'm going to name my table. Let's start with, like I said, I'm going to start with the genres table. So if you look at this again, we're going to make one called genres, and it's going to have two fields. It'll have ID, which will be our primary key, and our genre. Genres. Then I need to add fields. One was the ID, so I click on this add. I'm just going to go ahead and call it ID. I need to specify what data type that's going to hold. So if you look, this would hold an integer. So I'm going to keep that an integer. Now I want it to be a primary key, and to make it easy on myself, I'm going to go ahead and choose this AI, which is auto increment. So every time I make a new record, it'll just generate the next integer for me. So it makes it really easy. The ID has to have a value. It has to be unique. This way I don't have to remember what the last number I created was. Okay, so that's fine. Then let's add another field, and the next one was genre. So this is genres. So I guess like genre, you know what, maybe it would be, let's call it genre. I'll call it genre name, just to make it a little bit different from genre and genres, right? So I'm just going to change this here so I don't forget. Okay, ID, genre name. Now that's going to hold some text. This tool doesn't seem to have a lot of other ones. Usually there's a variable character or character. I'm just going to go ahead and say text for this. That'll be fine. And really that's all I need. So I need something with ID and genre name. I do wonder, let's see if I could just make it variable character, let's say 30. There's not going to be a genre longer than that. Seems to take it. So I'm going to go ahead and try that instead. Text holds a lot more information. So this is going to restrict my my value to 30 characters, and it'll shrink down to fit whatever it needs. So we'll give that a try. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK. Notice before I say that, this is a tool that is actually writing SQL for you. So notice as I'm doing this, it is writing SQL, and nothing happened until I hit OK. So this is the SQL that would create a table genre, and there are the definitions. So now if you look at this, you can see that I have under database structure, you can see the tables, here's genres, and I've got this, and you can see that it has an ID and it has a genre name, okay? And this would hold they're up to 30 characters. So I'm going to go ahead and create the movies table. Notice under database structure, I will click create table, and I'm going to go ahead and type movies. And what I need is our 3 fields. I need ID, which will be the primary key, name, which will hold the name of the movie, and then the genre ID, which will be the foreign key pulling from the ID in the table genres. So let's add the ID first. I'll call it ID. Type integer is great. I'm going to say it's a primary key and auto increment. I'm going to add another field, be name. That will hold my movie name. I can leave that as text, or once again, I can go ahead and type variable character. Now, movie names are sometimes a little longer. Variable characters do shrink down to hold whatever it seems to be typed into. Let's, I'm going to put 50 just in case there's some crazy long movie name. And now for this one, yeah, I think that's all I need for that. And then I need the genre ID. So I'm going to add one more field. Call it genre ID. This is going to hold an integer. And in this tool, the thing we need to see is actually way over in the right here. So I needed to open this up. We've got genre ID. I don't know if it's seemed to scroll weird. Let's see, there we go, genre ID. I still want it to be an integer because it's going to hold an integer, which is the key here. So this data type needs to match wherever it's pulling the key from. So it will be an integer. And what I'm going to do is go over here to foreign key. And if I double click, it has a little pull down. And since I already made my genre table, I can choose genres. That's the table I'm pulling from. And then I want to choose what field I'm pulling from. And I want the field ID from genres. Okay, so I'm going to be pulling from that. It's genres ID. Now it doesn't actually essentially take until I hit the enter key. So this is something I found interesting. If I entered it and I didn't actually hit the enter key, it didn't take. So notice in the SQL down here, it is showing that it will have a foreign key genre ID. It references genres field ID. Then I'm going to say OK. So now I have 2 tables. Now this SQLite sequence, just ignore this. This is just going to be extra stuff that you don't need to touch really. So I have my genres table, I have my movies table, and then I can go ahead and put some information in. So I'm going to jump over to that. To do that, I can go into Browse Data, and I can pull down what table I'd like to fill. Seems to me to make sense to do the genres first, because then I can fill it with the information that I need. So I'm going to pull this over here for reference. Hopefully it doesn't, they don't conflict too much. That should be fine. So over here, I want to add things to my table as far as information. Now the thing I do find confusing or a little in the way with this program is that it gives 2 fields there that look like I should be able to just type in, but those are filters and we should just leave that alone. What I need to do is make a new record, and once you got those going, it starts getting a little easier. So what I'm going to do is, got that, I'm going to click on, there's a pull down here, insert a new record in the current table. So I click on that, and it gives me a place where that data could go. Okay, so we have, notice that's auto-incremented. 1 is the first one. And the genre name, I can open this up so there's more room. And the genre name here, I'm going to type in comedy. Now to make this faster, all I have to do is hit Tab, and I hit it twice, and it makes a new record. So I don't have to keep hitting new record. Notice auto increment gave me 2. The next one, I want to be action. I'm going to hit Tab twice. 3rd time, animated. And then Tab again. sci-fi. Okay, so here is the information in my table. All right, so let's go over to our other table and start filling in movies. So I'm going to go here to movies. And so you can jump between browsing the values in your table just over here under browse data. So I'm going to go to movies. Same thing here. Before I am able to just enter things, I need to click on this insert a new record for it to give me a spot. And looks like it opens all of them up at the same width. So I'll just go like this. We'll just ignore that ID is huge. And here is, let me make this a little narrower so you can see them both, hopefully. All right, so I'm going to enter this first one back to the future. And then to choose my genre ID, what I'm going to look at is in my genre table, which actually looks just like this. So I'm just going to leave this up for reference, what one it's going to be. So for this, it's a comedy. I'm going to enter 1. And I can hit tab and it'll go over. So then I just start entering these in. Okay, Guardians of the Galaxy. And what's the genre ID? And notice it gives me that pull down, so it lets me pick what that ID is going to be. So Guardians of the Galaxy, I will say 2 is action. Okay, so let me go ahead and I'm going to fill this in with some data and then continue on. Okay, so now I've filled in the movies table and the ID was auto-incremented. The names I typed in, and for each I selected the appropriate genre ID that will match up with the genres. Okay, so for instance, if we go to movies, I can go to Blade Runner and look that genre ID is 4, and I can go over to genre and see 4 is sci-fi. So once this is created, then we can look at using SQL to connect them up. To access SQL in this tool, there is an Execute SQL tab, and you pretty much can just type into it like a console and hit play, and it'll run your SQL statement. So there are basic statements. For instance, you can say select, if I do select star, that's all from let's say what table we want. Select all from what movie, let's say movies. Select all from movies. All right, so let's hit play and it returns the movies table. Now, you can do things that narrow this down. I'm not going to focus on doing the join quite yet, but this SQL statement will really control whatever your record set is. So you can say where genre ID equals, let's say we want to see all the sci-fi, say where it equals 4, and I hit play. Notice it returns just those. So it doesn't mean that the table only has that many. The SQL statement's returning what we're asking it to do. Or I can select all from movies and I can say order by genre ID and run that. And so now it groups all of the comedy, all of the action, the animated, and the sci-fi. Or I can order by name. Okay, and then now it's alphabetical by name. So this is pretty standard. If you're interested in finding what the correct statement is, you can look online for SQL statements. I think the W3 Schools is pretty good. There's an SQLite site that has documentation, but this is a great place to test out your SQL before you actually go into Unity, so you know that whatever you're doing here works and it's not a Unity issue. So let's talk about the join, and then we'll look at how to display that in Unity. Let's say we want this to display the name of the movie, but we also want it to display the name of the genre which is stored in that other database. So we need to use a different set of statements here in the SQL using what I'm going to use as an inner join to connect those together and show what we want. So like I mentioned, W3 Schools has some really good quick resources if you're looking for SQL statements. And the thing that I'm going to be showing is the inner join. And what that does is it lets you select columns from two tables and you say how they're joined together. So the basic syntax of that is, and notice it's broken across 4 lines just to make it easier to read, but it actually could be one giant line. So I think this just makes it way easier to see what's going on. So what we're going to do is select the column names, or for now I'm going to do select star, which is all of the columns, just to show you what happens. From table 1, so one of the tables, and you say inner join table 2, so you list one table and the other table. You say on, and then you say the 2 columns that you want to match up. So for instance, we're going to have the movie genre ID equal to the genre ID, in the ID column in genres. So this is where it's going to say how they connect. That's essentially matching up the foreign key. Okay, so if you need more information, you can check out W3 Schools. That works out great. Just type in W3 Schools SQL, and it has lots of different types of things you can do. So let's go ahead and try this out in the DBBrowser. So for now, I'm going to say select all, which will be all of the columns, and then we'll talk about how to access those columns. And instead of having it all in one line, I'm going to hit enter. Now it doesn't run until I hit the play. So I'm going to say from the first from, and the first table I'm going to be working with is movies. Then I'm going to say inner join genres, right? And then I'm going to say on and say how the tables are connected. So I'm selecting everything from the table movies, and I'm going to be joining genres. On, and let's figure out what fields we want to connect. I want in movies, I want movies.genre ID. So I'm going to go back here. And notice it auto indicates some possibilities. So this is my table dot, and these are the fields I could choose from. Genre ID equals, and I want to use my genres table too, dot, and I want to match up with the ID, right? Because that's the key. So it's going to take the key from genres, match it up with the genre ID, which is this, and that's how it's going to connect the 2 tables. So when I hit run, it should show me all the fields from both tables. And here it is. So we've got ID. Notice there's another table called ID, or another field, pardon me. Name, genre ID, and genre name. Now, I really only want to see name and genre name, right? I actually don't care about the IDs. Genre ID is just a way to connect them, and this other ID I don't care about either. The IDs are really just, or the primary keys are just a way for the database to organize itself. So what you do is you alter the asterisk. So what I can do is say what fields I would like to see. So I can say select movies dot name, and I can say comma, and genres dot genre name. So now it should only return this column and this column. So let's hit play. So there we go. These are built-in numbers to the program, so this has actually, that's not like a primary key or anything. So here we are. We've got Back to the Future, comedy, action, and so on. We can still add on those things at the end where I could say where, I could say more like genre name equals comedy. So let's say I only want to see the movies that are considered comedy. When I hit play, it only returns those. So you use this to select the data that's going to be sent back to you, and then you can use your programs such as Unity and C# to display that information. But before you go into other programs, I would highly recommend you get things set up, you try out your SQL, make sure it's returning what you want. Otherwise, you've got too many variables going on when you're trying to debug. So in the next video, I'm going to show how to use this SQLite database in your Unity project to display the join information.